Hello and warm greetings wherever you are. I recently wrote a book. Well, what else is new? I am an academic. The title, but I've written a few other books as well, but this is my favorite and probably my last big book. The title is What Makes Education Catholic? And then the subtitle is Spiritual Foundations. And in a sense, the title is the question, what makes education Catholic? But the subtitle is the answer, spiritual foundations. And while it's found spiritual foundations of Catholic education obviously and clearly are drawn out of Catholic faith and Catholic convictions, they in fact reflect universal values. They can enrich the life of any person of goodwill, and they can contribute to the common good of any and every society. There are values like the dignity and equality of the human person, moral formation and honesty and integrity in people's personal and social lives, a commitment to compassion and justice in the midst of the world, an opposition to every form of discrimination, and so on and so forth. Those values, they can be embraced, as I said, by any person of goodwill and enrich their lives. So I think one of my reasons for writing the book is because I'm still convinced that Catholic schools are of enormous significance and have tremendous potential, not only for the Catholic community, but for the life of the world, for the common good. It's the largest independent system of education in the world that the world has ever seen. There's never been larger. There are 55,000 Catholic schools throughout the world, from research universities like Notre Dame, Boston College, to kindergartens. 55,000, and we're in over 200 different countries, and are educating about 150 million students. So surely this huge system of education has tremendous potential and possibility. I ask the question, what makes education Catholic? Because I think it's a new question in our time, and for two particular reasons, or for at least two reasons. The first one is the radical shift in the faculty and staff of Catholic schools. Now, traditionally, Catholic schools have been staffed and led by vowed religious, priests, brothers, nuns. 1965, over 90% of the faculty and staff of the Catholic schools of the United States were vowed religious, men and women. Now, it's less than 3%, an enormous shift in faculty. And we trusted the vowed religious because they had a spiritual formation. And so we just presumed that they knew and were committed to the spiritual foundations of Catholic education, and indeed would be good stewards of that. But now that the vowed religious are in large part gone, and some schools gone entirely. I was in a Xaverian school recently that had no Xaverian brother on the staff. How will we ensure the Catholicity and the spiritual foundations of our schools? How will who will take these great values and foundations and see to it that they're put to work? My own answer to that in the text is that we have to have a cadre, at least a cadre, a core cadre, a principal, a president, and so on of the school, of people who know the charism, who know the tradition, who know these spiritual foundations and are deeply committed to implementing them throughout the whole curriculum. And by curriculum, I don't mean just what we teach, I mean how we teach, where we teach, who we teach, etc. The whole life of the school should reflect these spiritual foundations. Some years ago, I was getting ready to teach my summer school here at Boston College, and an older gentleman passed by me at about 1 minute to the bell, and he stopped and he looked at me. He said, "Tom, have you ever been principal of a Catholic high school?" I said, "No." "Have you ever worked in a Catholic high school?" I said, "Oh, not really." He said, "Well, that's what I need to learn. So, any other courses going on?" I said, "Oh yeah, we got 2 or 3 other courses." I said, "I'm just about to start class. But if you wait till the break time, I'll bring you down, I'll introduce you, and you can take one of these other courses." So I went ahead with the introduction. So at the break time, the first break, the old gentleman came up to me and he says, "Tom, I think I'm going to stay." I said, "You are?" I said, "Oh, why would you ever want to stay?" He said, "Well," he said, "I think I figured out what I really need to learn." He said, "I know how to be a principal, budgets and faculty and all this kind of stuff, curriculum." He says, "I really need to learn now how to be a spiritual leader. If I'm going to be principal of a Catholic high school. And I said to him, Joe, we became friends afterwards. I said, you've hit the nail on the head. So that's what we need. Now, I said I was addressing the question as a fresh question for two reasons. The first is the change in personnel of the leadership and teachers. The second is the change in personnel of the students in our school. Catholic schools are exploding throughout the world, especially in countries that give financial aid to independent schools. But their student body now is enormous diversity. Students from other religious traditions or no religious traditions, and indeed many of the Catholic students are more cultural Catholics than we'd say practicing ones. But for example, in Pakistan, there's a huge Catholic school system, over 500 Catholic schools. 90% of the student body and 90% of the faculty are Muslim, and yet they're Catholic schools. Say in Korea, 80% of the students are not Catholic. In Hong Kong, 1 out of every 4 students of school-going age, from kindergarten to university, 1 out of every 4 is in a Catholic school. 90% of them are not Catholic. And yet Pope Francis, as you might imagine, said, welcome them all. It's our best contribution we can make to the common good. And if they come to us as Muslims, then they better leave our school as better Muslims. And indeed, Benazir Bhutto, God rest her soul, the wonderful woman who was Prime Minister of Pakistan twice and tragically assassinated, but she always said that she learned from Muslim faith at Jesus and Mary Convent School in Karachi. And she also learned there that she someday could be Prime Minister of Pakistan. In other words, she was deepened in her Muslim identity and faith, and yet with possibilities as a woman that might not be taken for granted, certainly, in a traditional Islamic society. So I think we've tremendous, even for the diversity of our students, welcome them all, but still have a good Catholic school for them. The third key question is, where do we find these spiritual values that should constitute and define Catholic education? Now, an easy answer is to simply say the Catholic intellectual tradition, what we typically call the CIT. 2,000 years of spiritual wisdom, knowledge, and practice that has shaped Catholic education across the centuries. And the Church began sponsoring schools by early in the 2nd century of the Christian era. And from chapters 3 to 10 of the book, I elaborate on that CIT. And I draw upon the obvious characters, Augustine, Benedict, Aquinas, Ignatius, and Julian of Norwich, Angela de Merici, Mary Ward, Elizabeth Ann Seton, the great women that have so shaped this tradition of Catholic education. And then I lay out some of the great core convictions that mark Catholic faith, especially as relevant to education. And the great conviction that has run throughout the Catholic intellectual tradition is the partnership of reason and faith. That reason needs the monitor of faith, and faith needs the monitor of critical reason. And it has led on to all kinds of other partnerships. The partnership between science and revelation, for example, that is very constitutive of Catholic education. For example, so can we go into our science classes and talk to students about the world emerging, the cosmogenesis, the cosmic story of creation, 14 billion years ago from some spark or whatever? Can we do that in science class and then go into theology, religion class and teach them Genesis chapter 1, that God made the world in 6 days, and the 7th day God rested? The answer is yes, of course we can. There are two different ways of knowing. One is scientific, one is parabolic, allegorical, metaphorical, whatever you want to call it. And they enrich each other. The story of the cosmos makes us all the more amazed at God's creation. And yet, Genesis 1 teaches us things that cosmogenesis does not teach. That, for example, the men and women are all made, and it says explicitly in Genesis 1, chapter 26, 27, male and female, God made them in God's own image and likeness. Now, you won't get that from the sciences. And then it makes very clear that God, Genesis 1:28 and Genesis 2:15, I believe, make it even more explicit, that we are responsible for this environment, that we're called to be good stewards of God's creation. Now, the two complement each other, the sciences and the revelation. One of the tragedies of American education, I don't mean to badmouth our public schools, but there's almost no value formation at all. It's STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, but there's no values being taught, and it's tragic. And I've had experiences of students who went out into public schools and tried to, do something with social justice when they were teaching sociology. Teaching sociology. I'm thinking of one example in particular. It was told to cease and desist. You couldn't do that in a public school. So there's almost no values being taught in our public schools, at least our high schools. I'm sure there's some perhaps in the early grades. But typically it's devoid of value. But Catholic schools, I think, have a powerful possibility. So all Catholic education should be formative, but all education should be formative, not just informative, but formative as well. And that's the old tradition. That's Plato, Aristotle, that education should be humanizing, should enable people to make and keep life human for themselves and for others. I mean, that's the ancient Greek philosophy of education. But it got lost with the Enlightenment, and then with the modern means and technologies and all the rest of it, and kind of technical rationality took over in our schools, and they're devoid of values formation. So I think all education should be deeply formative of people's values, outlook, potential, possibility of their own embrace of their personal identity. What really is at the heart of Catholic education? And I come up with an amazing one-word answer: Jesus. Now, when I say that in public, giving workshops or whatever, people kind of look up and say, Jesus? I say, yes, Jesus. Jesus is the heart and soul of Catholic faith. So Jesus should be the heart and soul of Catholic education. It's kind of a no-brainer. Now, why are Catholics surprised when I say Jesus? Because in many ways, we're still only learning about Jesus, and we have remedial work to be done to catch up. Our Protestant brothers and sisters are much more glib at talking about Jesus. But Catholics, we're kind of new to Jesus. Now, I know since Second Vatican Council we're doing better, etc. And there's a lot of historical reasons for this. For example, the old catechisms, the Baltimore Catechism, the Maynooth Catechism, that our parents, I think, I grew up with it, you probably didn't, but our parents, your grandparents did. And the Baltimore Catechism was based on, the doctrinal section of it was based on the Creed, on the Apostles' Creed. So I took each article of the Apostles' Creed and catechized it. Who made the world? God made the world. Who is God? God is our Father in heaven. I still know the answers, questions and answers. But the difficulty was that the Apostles' Creed goes from born of the Virgin Mary to suffered under Pontius Pilate. In other words, the Creed leaves out his life. And so did the Catechism. There isn't a word in the Baltimore Catechism about the multiplication of the loaves and fishes, the feeding of the hungry people, the great stories he told, the Good Samaritan, the prodigal son, Lazarus at the gate, the stories told about. There's nothing about Jesus in the Baltimore Catechism, or whatever catechism might have been used at the time. Now, and then another difficulty was that we had a one-year cycle of scripture readings at Mass, gospel readings, but they were read in Latin. And throughout most of the traditional cultures, the gospel reading was in Latin. Nobody understood what they were saying. So we're very sparse on Jesus. Now, as I said, we're making up time, etc. And the Catechism of the Catholic Church has a beautiful summary statement for our time. It says, that our Catholic faith is made up of all kinds of sacraments and symbols and commandments and codes and creeds and all the rest of it and scriptures. But the Catechism summarizes. It says at the heart we find the person, and I love how the Catechism puts it, the person of Jesus of Nazareth. In other words, that carpenter fellow who walked the roads of Galilee preaching and teaching. That Jesus of Nazareth, who was the only Son from the Father. In other words, the presence of God in human history, the divine Savior. And we need the both. And we've done, for Catholics, we have known about Christ the Savior. But Jesus the carpenter, we're not nearly as familiar with Jesus the carpenter. And what I find when I read him now from the perspective of Catholic education as a Catholic educator, what I find is that he was a tremendous teacher. And in fact, he was described as teaching over 150 different times. And I think we have a tremendous wisdom to learn from both what he taught and how he taught it, and especially by way of the spiritual foundations of Catholic education. If I was doing a workshop with you, I would advise you and encourage you now to pause, turn off the camera and or the player, and talk about it. What do you think were the central values of Jesus' life, and what difference might they make in a Catholic school, and how we would in the curriculum of a Catholic school? In other words, what we teach, how we teach, who we teach, where we teach, etc. What difference might Jesus make if we put him at the center, at the heart of it all? It's a great question. And I just want to make take a few major themes from the life and teaching of the historical Jesus, and the great, and just raise up some of those themes and what they might mean for Catholic education. All the scholars agree that the Jesus of history, that scholars debate about did he say this, did he say that, but they say that we can have an approximation of his values, and especially of his values, the values he championed and preached and lived and died and rose again for. But they all agree that the central theme of his preaching, at least in the synoptic gospels and echoed deeply in John, but in the core of his teaching, was the reign of God. Now in John, it's more fullness of life. But in the three synoptics, Jesus' big theme is the reign of God. It begins at the very beginning of Mark's gospel. He came proclaiming the arrival of the reign of God. And this reign of God was a phenomenal vision to propose for human history. It was a great utopian dream when everybody would have what they need, when all would be equal. The poet William Butler Yeats describes it, the reign of God, as the land of heart's desire, when all of the longings of the human heart are fulfilled and satisfied, and the dignity of the person. I mean, all of the possibilities that we have. This is what he wanted for us, because this is God's vision. This is God's dream for us, the reign of God, and that all will be well, and all will do well, and that this God of ours is indeed present with us and enabling us and encouraging us and bringing us to do, as he taught us in Our Father, to do God's will on earth. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And so that emphasis of doing this will of God, this fullness of life and wholeness for all people and all creation, what a tremendous transcendent vision to propose to young people. That this is really what life is all about. This is really what life is for. We come forth from God to journey home to God, toward the eternal reign of God. But along the way, we have to be implementing and living as if for the reign of God and allowing God to reign in our lives. I mean, what an amazing, hopeful, transcendent possibility and vision to propose to young people, and what they can contribute, that they can help to bring about the reign of God. And its greatest commandment, to love God and love our neighbor as ourselves, including enemies. I mean, what an amazing outlook to propose to young people. The second major theme in the public ministry and teaching of Jesus, and it echoes the first one, is his deep commitment to compassion and justice. He worked miracles to feed the hungry, to give drink to the thirsty, to heal the sick, to console the bereaved, to drive out evil, and to restore people's dignity away from social shame, because when you got sick, you also got excluded. There's only two miracles recounted 6 times in the scriptures, in the Gospels: the miracle of the resurrection and the miracle of the loaves and fishes. It's in all 4 Gospels, and then twice in Matthew, twice in Mark. It must have been a central aspect of his life, feeding hungry people. Well, what a calling for us. What a commitment for us. To feed people's bodies, to feed people's souls. He claimed that he was fulfilling Isaiah chapter 61, verse 1, the great messianic prophecy that he'd come to bring good news to the poor, liberty to captives, sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free. This is what life is about. This is how life should be lived. How about proposing that to young people in our Catholic education? Tremendous life-giving values. The third one I'll raise up is his tremendous affirmation of ordinary, everyday people. Isn't it amazing? We hear him saying to poor peasant people, unlettered, uneducated people, you're the light of the world. You're the salt of the earth. Or the even more powerful example for me is when he cures somebody. So often, when he cured people, like the woman with the hemorrhage, the 12-year hemorrhage, he said to them, he never says, I cured you. He always says, your faith cured you. You did it yourself. What tremendous affirmation of our potential. Bring that into Catholic education. What does it invite people to propose to young people about their possibilities, to honor their gifts and their native talents, and to mentor them and enable them to grow into fullness of life, as old Irenaeus said at the beginning of the church, to become fully alive to the glory of God. That's the great human vocation that Jesus is championing, that enabling of people to become fully alive. And the fourth one, the last one I'll mention, was his tremendous inclusivity. And of course, it's epitomized in his table fellowship, the fact that he welcomed all to the table, saints and sinners, prostitutes, tax collectors, all were welcome. And in the world of the time, the table was a very powerful symbol. When you brought somebody to the table, you had fully included them. You hadn't just invited them for a snack. You had fully included them in your circle of friends and family, etc. And yet he does it constantly throughout the Gospels. Or his outreach to the poor, to young and old. Most amazing of all, though, was his inclusion, his full inclusion and welcome of women among its core group of disciples. All 3 synoptic accounts of the crucifixion say that the women at the foot of the cross had come up from Galilee with him, which, if you take John's chronology, that means they're with him for all 3 years. And core, Luke chapter 8, verses 1 to 3 makes clear there were core disciples, members of his inner circle. And of course, Mary Magdalene is the first witness to the resurrection, and the examples go on. His tremendous inclusivity of women and of children. It was very radical in the world of the time. Remember, the disciples tried to hunt these little kids away and told the parents, oh, don't take those kids out of here. But Jesus said, no, let the little children come to me, because of such is the reign of God, and you big people better become more childlike if you want to enter in. But what a care and love for children and inclusivity. And that should be epitomized in our Catholic schools, that hospitality, that welcome, that inclusion. If they're going to be truly Catholic, the word Catholic comes from kathoholos, which means to include everyone. Or as James Joyce said in Finnegan's Wake, Catholic means here comes everybody. That's the kind of a school. That's the kind of an education we should be providing. There's a lot more to be said. It's a long-winded story, as I said, 2,000 years. And yet, I would propose that Catholic schools, Catholic education, was never more needed than in the world today. And I believe that these schools, when conducted well and according to what they ought to, the kind of school they should be, I think they'll be a whole source of new life for the church itself, and for the life of the world. I think they have tremendous possibility. Well, that's just chapter 1, and then there's chapters 2 to 10, which continues to unfold this great story of Catholic education throughout the last 2,000 years, and drawing out the wisdom that's there for our contemporary world and place. So God's blessings on your good work. If you're a Catholic educator, whether distinctly Catholic or from some other tradition, you can still be a good Catholic educator, I believe. And whatever part you play in this great vocation, may it be blessed abundantly. Thank you.